The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for what felt like the 1000th time. His polished black boots reflected the early light, and his tall bearskin hat sat perfectly straight on his head. To the hundreds of tourists gathering behind the rope barriers, he was just another silent statue in the Queen's Guard, a living piece of British tradition frozen in time. But James was far from frozen. Behind his stoic expression, his mind raced with thoughts of his sick daughter Emma, who lay in a hospital bed just 30 miles away. The 7-year-old had been battling leukemia for 8 months, and the treatments were taking their toll on the entire family. His wife Sarah spent every waking hour at the hospital, leaving James to maintain his duties while his heart ached with worry. The tourists began their familiar dance around him. Cameras flashed incessantly as people tried to make him laugh, smile, or even blink. Children waved frantically, adults made silly faces, and teenagers posed for selfies just inches from his face. According to regulations, James couldn't react. He had to remain perfectly still, eyes fixed straight ahead, no matter what happened around him. A small group of American tourists approached, led by a middle-aged woman with a bright yellow sun hat. "Look, kids," she announced loudly. "These guards are trained not to move no matter what we do." Her twin boys, probably around 8 years old, immediately began jumping up and down in front of James, making faces and shouting to get his attention. One of the boys suddenly stopped jumping. He tilted his head and stared directly into James's eyes with the innocent curiosity that only children possess. "Mom," the boy said quietly, "why does the guard look sad?" "His eyes look really sad." The mother glanced at James's face, then quickly ushered her children away, embarrassed by the observation. But the boy's words hit James like a physical blow. Even through his professional mask, a perceptive child had seen his pain. He fought to maintain his composure as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. 20 minutes later, the same family returned. This time, the observant boy carried a small piece of paper in his hand. He approached James slowly and carefully placed the paper at his feet, making sure not to touch the guard. Then he stepped back and gave a small, respectful salute. James couldn't look down while on duty, but he caught a glimpse of colorful crayon marks on the paper. The boy had drawn something for him. His throat tightened as he fought back tears that threatened to fall. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of tourist groups coming and going. Street performers entertained crowds nearby. Vendors sold postcards and souvenirs, and the changing of the guard ceremony approached. But James couldn't stop thinking about the drawing at his feet and the kindness of a stranger's child. During a brief moment when the crowd thinned, James's colleague, Corporal David Williams, discreetly approached during his patrol. David had served alongside James for 3 years and knew about Emma's condition. Without saying a word, he bent down and retrieved the paper, glancing at it quickly before sliding it into his pocket. "I'll keep it safe until your break," David whispered as he passed, so quietly that only James could hear. The next hour felt like an eternity. James performed his duties flawlessly, but inside he was burning with curiosity about what the little boy had drawn. Finally, his replacement arrived for the changing of the guard ceremony. As the tourists gathered to watch the formal exchange, James marched in perfect formation with his unit back to the guard room. In the privacy of the guard room, David handed him the folded paper. James's hands actually trembled as he opened it. The drawing showed a stick figure in a red coat and tall black hat, clearly meant to be him. Next to the guard stood a small stick figure girl with yellow hair, holding the guard's hand. Above them, the boy had written in careful block letters, "I hope your little girl gets better soon." James sat down heavily on the bench, the paper shaking in his hands. How had an 8-year-old American tourist known about Emma? He stared at the drawing, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness from a complete stranger. The simple crayon drawing meant more to him than any expensive gift ever could. "Everything all right, mate?" David asked, concerned by James's reaction. James showed him the drawing, his voice barely a whisper. How could he have known? "I never said anything about Emma. I never even moved." David studied the paper and shook his head in amazement. Sometimes kids just know things, don't they? They see what adults miss. That afternoon, James carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his wallet, right next to a photo of Emma taken before she got sick. Her bright smile and messy pigtails looked so different from the pale, bald little girl fighting for her life in the hospital. But somehow, The drawing gave him hope that she might smile like that again. When his shift ended, James drove straight to the hospital. Sarah was sitting beside Emma's bed, reading her a story from a worn picture book. Emma looked up when he entered, her face lighting up despite her exhaustion. "Daddy, did you stand really still today?" she asked, her voice small but excited. It had become their daily ritual. Emma loved hearing about his work, especially the funny things tourists did to try to make him laugh. James sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out the drawing. "Actually, something very special happened today." He showed her the paper, watching her eyes grow wide with wonder. "A boy drew this for me," James explained. "He somehow knew that I have a special little girl, and he wanted you to get better." Emma held the drawing carefully, studying every crayon mark. "He made me have yellow hair like I used to," she whispered, touching her bald head self-consciously. "You're beautiful no matter what," James said, kissing her forehead. "And this boy thinks so too. He drew you holding hands with me, because he knows how much we love each other." That night, Emma insisted on taping the drawing to the wall beside her hospital bed. She told every nurse, doctor, and visitor about the kind boy at the castle who drew her a picture. The simple act of kindness from a stranger had given her something precious. Proof that people she'd never met were thinking about her and hoping for her recovery. As James drove home that evening, he realized something had changed inside him. The weight of worry and helplessness that had been crushing him for months felt lighter somehow. A child's innocent gesture had reminded him that kindness existed everywhere, even in the most unexpected moments. Tomorrow he would stand guard again, but he would carry that drawing's message with him, that hope could come from the most unlikely sources. 3 weeks after receiving the drawing, James noticed changes in himself that surprised everyone around him. While he maintained the same professional silence during his duties, there was something different in his eyes. The crushing sadness that the American boy had noticed was slowly being replaced by quiet determination and hope. Emma's condition had stabilized, though the doctors remained cautiously optimistic. The drawing still hung beside her bed, and she had started adding her own artwork around it. The hospital room was becoming a gallery of colorful pictures showing guards, castles, and happy families. Each drawing represented another day of fighting, another small victory against the disease that threatened to steal her childhood. It was during this time that Lance Corporal Michael Torres joined their unit. Fresh from training, the 22-year-old was nervous about his first posting at Windsor Castle. The responsibility of representing the crown in front of thousands of daily visitors felt overwhelming. During his first week, Michael struggled with the strict requirements of remaining motionless for hours, while tourists tried every possible way to distract him. James watched the young guard's difficulties with understanding. He remembered his own early days, how the constant attention felt suffocating, how the weight of tradition sometimes felt heavier than the rifle on his shoulder. But James also saw something else in Michael, a genuine desire to serve with honor. Despite his nervousness, on a particularly busy Saturday morning, a large group of elderly tourists from a care home arrived for their planned visit. They moved slowly with walkers and wheelchairs, many supported by their adult children or caretakers. The group was part of a special program that brought seniors to experience historical sites they might never see again. Among them was Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, an 87-year-old woman who had lived through World War II as a young girl in London during the Blitz. She sat in a wheelchair, her gnarled hands folded in her lap, her cloudy eyes trying to focus on the guards through thick glasses. Her granddaughter Emma, coincidentally sharing the same name as James's daughter, pushed the wheelchair while pointing out various features of the castle. Mrs. Fletcher had specifically requested this visit. As a child during the war, she had seen King George VI and Queen Elizabeth visit bomb shelters and damaged neighborhoods. The sight of the royal guards had always represented safety and continuity to her during those terrifying nights when German planes dropped bombs on London. Now, facing her own final battle with advanced dementia, she wanted to see the guards one more time. The group gathered near where Michael stood at attention. His nerves were already frayed from 3 hours of duty, and the presence of so many people made him even more anxious. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his hands trembled slightly on his rifle. Mrs. Fletcher's granddaughter wheeled her to the front of the group. The elderly woman stared up at Michael with intense concentration, as if trying to remember something important. Suddenly, she began to speak in a voice that carried across the courtyard. "Thank you, young man," she said clearly, her words cutting through the murmur of tourist conversations. Thank you for standing guard. You kept us safe during the war, and you're keeping us safe now." Michael's eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't respond, but the woman's words hit him like a physical force. She was confused, thinking he had actually served during World War II, but her gratitude was real and profound. The crowd around them fell silent, sensing the emotional weight of the moment. Mrs. Fletcher continued, her voice growing stronger. "My father served in the Guards. He never came home from Normandy. But seeing you here, standing strong and proud, reminds me that his sacrifice meant something." That tradition continues. Tears began streaming down Michael's face. He couldn't move, couldn't acknowledge her words according to regulations, but he couldn't stop the emotional response either. The weight of history, of service, of sacrifice, suddenly became real to him in a way that training had never conveyed. James, positioned nearby, watched the scene unfold. He saw Michael's struggle, recognized the young guard's emotional battle between duty and human feeling. Without hesitation, James made a decision that went against protocol but followed a higher law of compassion. Moving discreetly from his position, James approached Mrs. Fletcher's wheelchair. He knelt beside her, bringing himself to her eye level, and gently took her weathered hand in his white-gloved one. The tourists and even other guards stared in shock. Active guards simply didn't break formation or interact with visitors. "Ma'am," James said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "it's our honor to stand guard for you. Your father's service, your courage during the war, your presence here today. This is exactly why we do what we do." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes cleared for a moment, the fog of dementia lifting briefly. She squeezed James's hand with surprising strength. "He would have been so proud," she whispered. "So very proud of all of you." James nodded, his own tears falling freely now. "We're proud to follow in his footsteps, ma'am. Every day we stand here, we remember those who came before us." The granddaughter was crying too, pulling out her phone to record this unexpected moment. Other tourists stood in respectful silence, many wiping their own eyes as they witnessed something far more profound than a changing of the guard ceremony. After a few moments, James gently released Mrs. Fletcher's hand and stood. He looked directly at Michael, whose face was still wet with tears, and gave him an almost imperceptible nod. The message was clear. It was okay to feel, okay to be human even while representing something larger than themselves. For the rest of their visit, Mrs. Fletcher sat quietly, but her face held a peace that her granddaughter hadn't seen in months. The confusion and fear that usually clouded her expression had lifted, replaced by a calm satisfaction. She had completed something important, said words that needed to be said. Later, during their break, Michael approached James in the guard room. His hands were still shaking slightly from the emotional encounter. "Sir," Michael began formally, then stopped. "James, I don't know how you knew to do that. I was falling apart out there. And you saved that moment. You made it about her instead of about protocol." James sat down across from the younger guard, thinking carefully about his response. The drawing from Emma's hospital room had taught him something about unexpected kindness, about human connections that transcended rules and regulations. "Michael," he said finally, "we wear these uniforms to serve something bigger than ourselves, but we can't forget that we're serving people, real people with real stories and real needs." Mrs. Fletcher needed to say those words, and you needed to hear them. Sometimes our greatest service happens when we remember our humanity. "But you broke protocol," Michael pointed out. "You could get in trouble for leaving your position." James smiled, thinking of Emma's drawing safely tucked in his wallet. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't in the regulation manual. That woman lived through the Blitz, lost her father in the war, and is now losing her memory to disease. If acknowledging her gratitude costs me a reprimand, that's a price worth paying. That afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher's granddaughter returned to find James. She handed him a letter written on care home stationery, the handwriting shaky but readable. "Gran wrote this for you after we got back," the young woman explained. She had one of her clear moments and insisted on writing it herself. She said it was important. James opened the letter carefully. In Mrs. Fletcher's trembling script, it read, "Dear Guard, today you reminded me why we fought so hard to preserve what we loved. Your kindness gave me peace. Thank you for seeing me as more than just an old woman in a wheelchair. You saw my history, my gratitude, my need to say thank you one last time. That is true service. With deepest respect, Dorothy Fletcher. As James read the letter, he understood that his decision to break protocol hadn't been about breaking rules. It had been about honoring the deeper purpose behind those rules. The uniform, the ceremony, the traditions all existed to serve something greater. The connection between generations, the respect for sacrifice, the acknowledgement of shared humanity. That evening at the hospital, James showed Emma both the letter and the photos that Mrs. Fletcher's granddaughter had taken. Emma studied the images carefully, her young mind processing the emotion captured in the pictures. "Daddy," she said thoughtfully, "you made that lady happy like that boy made me happy with his drawing." James nodded, realizing his daughter had understood something profound. "Yes, sweetheart, sometimes the most important thing we can do is show people that we see them, that we care about their stories." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given in weeks. "I want to draw a picture for that lady," she announced. "She looks like she needs a picture too." As Emma began working on a new drawing, James reflected on how kindness seemed to create more kindness. Like ripples spreading across a pond, the American boy's drawing had opened his heart to compassion, which had enabled him to recognize Mrs. Fletcher's need, which had now inspired Emma to reach out to another person in need. Each act of kindness had multiplied, creating connections between strangers who would never meet but who had touched each other's lives in meaningful ways. 2 months later, James stood at his familiar post outside Windsor Castle, but everything had changed. Emma was finally home from the hospital, her treatment successful and her hair beginning to grow back in soft blonde wisps. The drawing from the American boy still hung in her bedroom, joined now by dozens of other pictures she had created during her recovery. Word of James's compassionate interaction with Mrs. Fletcher had spread quietly through the guard unit, not as gossip but as inspiration. Rather than facing discipline for breaking protocol, James had received unofficial recognition from his superiors who understood that true service sometimes required human judgment over rigid adherence to rules. The morning started like any other, with tourists gathering early to watch the changing of the guard ceremony. James noticed a familiar yellow sun hat in the crowd and felt his heart skip. The American family that had started this journey of kindness had returned to London. The same twin boys who had visited months earlier now stood in front of him, both taller and more confident than before. They approached respectfully, clearly remembering their previous encounter. The perceptive boy who had first drawn the picture stepped forward, carrying a carefully wrapped package. "Sir," the boy said formally, looking directly into James's eyes, "I brought something for you and your daughter." He placed the package at James's feet, just as he had done with the first drawing. But this time, several other tourists began to notice the interaction. A small crowd gathered as the boy stepped back and gave his respectful salute. James maintained his position, but his eyes tracked to the package. Through the clear plastic wrapping, he could see what appeared to be a children's book. The cover showed an illustration of a royal guard standing beside a small blonde girl. The title read, "The Guard and the Brave Princess," and below it, in smaller text, "By Tommy Chen, age 8. Michael Torres, now confident and seasoned after months of service, approached during his patrol rotation. He discreetly retrieved the package, understanding immediately its significance. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the young guard carefully secured the book. "This is amazing," a woman in the crowd whispered. "Look at how they take care of each other." During his break, James opened Tommy Chen's gift with trembling hands. The little boy had created an entire picture book, telling the story of their encounter. Simple crayon drawings showed a sad guard, a sick princess in a hospital bed, a kind boy leaving a drawing, and finally, the princess getting better and playing with her father in a beautiful garden. On the last page, Tommy had written, "Dear Mr. Guard, my mom told me about your little girl being sick. I asked my grandma how to help someone far away, and she said kindness travels around the world faster than anything. I hope your princess is all better now. Love, Tommy." Attached to the back cover was a letter from Tommy's mother. "Dear Sir, Tommy couldn't stop talking about you after our visit. He spent weeks creating this book and insisted we return to London to deliver it personally. He's donated his allowance money to children's cancer research in your daughter's honor. Thank you for inspiring his compassion." James sat in the guardroom, overwhelmed by the realization that his personal struggle had somehow created a chain reaction of kindness involving people across an ocean. Tommy's grandmother had been right. Kindness really did travel around the world. That afternoon brought another surprise. Mrs. Fletcher's granddaughter arrived with an elderly man James didn't recognize. The woman approached Michael, who was now comfortable handling special situations. "Excuse me," she said politely. "My grandmother passed away peacefully last week. This is her brother, Harold, who served in the guards during Korea. She left specific instructions that we should bring him here to meet the guard who showed her such kindness." Harold Fletcher was 91 years old, but he stood straight and proud despite his walking cane. His eyes were bright and alert as he approached James during the changing ceremony. Unlike his sister, Harold had no confusion or dementia. His mind was sharp and his purpose clear. "Sergeant," Harold said formally, recognizing James's rank from his uniform. "My sister Dorothy spoke of you constantly in her final weeks. You gave her peace and dignity in her last clear moment. As a fellow guardsman, I wanted to thank you personally for upholding the finest traditions of our service." Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn metal object. This was Dorothy's father's medal from Normandy. She wanted you to have it, not to keep, but to hold for a moment, and remember that every person who stands in your post carries the honor of those who came before. James accepted the medal with reverence. The brass was dark with age, the ribbon faded, but the weight of its history was immense. For a moment, he felt connected to every guard who had ever stood duty, protecting not just buildings or royalty, but the ideals and memories that defined their nation. "Sir," James said quietly, "I'm honored to serve in the same tradition as your family. Your sister reminded me why this duty matters." Harold nodded approvingly. "She died knowing that young people like you still understand service." That knowledge gave her great comfort. As Harold returned the medal to his jacket, he added, "There's something else. Dorothy left instructions for a donation to be made to children's cancer research in your daughter's name. She said one act of kindness should always create another." The revelation hit James like a physical blow. Mrs. Fletcher, in her final weeks, had somehow learned about Emma and had chosen to honor their brief connection with a gift to help other children. The chain of kindness that had started with Tommy's drawing was continuing to grow and reach people in ways James could never have imagined. That evening at home, James gathered his family around the kitchen table. Sarah, looking healthier and more relaxed than she had in months, listened with amazement as James recounted the day's events. Emma, her hair now long enough for tiny pigtails, studied Tommy's handmade book with intense concentration. "Read it again, Daddy," Emma requested, for the third time. She loved seeing herself portrayed as a brave princess, loved knowing that a boy in America had thought about her and created something beautiful in her honor. "You know what this means, don't you?" Sarah said, looking at her husband with pride. "Your kindness to that elderly woman started something bigger than any of us realized. Tommy's donation, Mrs. Fletcher's gift, the awareness you're creating. It's all connected." James nodded, finally understanding the full scope of what had begun with a simple drawing left at his feet. "It's like Emma said, kindness makes more kindness, but I never imagined it could reach so many people." Over the following weeks, James noticed more changes in how people interacted with the guards. Tourists seemed more respectful, more aware that real people stood behind the uniforms. Children brought drawings and letters, adults shared brief words of gratitude, and veterans like Harold Fletcher stopped to pay their respects. The guard unit began receiving letters from around the world. Tommy's story had been shared on social media by his mother, and people from different countries were writing to express their appreciation for the guard's service. Some included donations to various charities. Others simply shared their own stories of military family members or personal struggles. Michael Torres, inspired by James's example, started an informal program where guards could discreetly acknowledge special visitors, veterans, military families, children fighting illnesses. The program wasn't officially recognized, but commanding officers understood its value in maintaining the human connection that made their ceremonial duties meaningful. 6 months after Emma's recovery, James received a final surprise. A package arrived from America containing a professional hardcover version of Tommy's book, The Guard and the Brave Princess. Tommy's mother had submitted it to a children's publisher who specialized in books about courage and kindness. The book had been accepted for publication, with all proceeds going to international children's cancer research. On the dedication page it read, "For Emma, who taught me that real princesses fight dragons called cancer. For her father, who taught me that real guards protect people's hearts. And for Mrs. Fletcher, who taught me that kindness never gets old. As James read those words to Emma at bedtime, she looked up at him with eyes full of wonder. Daddy, we're in a real book that will help other sick kids? Yes, sweetheart. Your story is going to help children all over the world. Emma smiled and snuggled closer. I'm glad that boy saw you were sad that day. If he hadn't made that first picture, none of this would have happened. James kissed her forehead and tucked the covers around her small frame. She was right, of course. One moment of human perception, one act of childhood compassion, had created ripples that continued to spread across continents and through countless lives. Standing at his post the next morning, James felt the weight of his uniform differently than before. He wasn't just guarding a building or maintaining a tradition. He was protecting the space where human connections could flourish, where kindness could take root and grow into something larger than anyone could imagine. The tourists came and went as always, cameras flashing and children waving. But now James saw each face not as a distraction to be ignored, but as a potential moment of connection, a chance for the kind of magic that had transformed his own darkest period into something beautiful and meaningful. In his wallet, alongside Emma's hospital photo and Tommy's original drawing, James now carried a small card with Mrs. Fletcher's words. True service means seeing people as more than they appear to be. It had become his personal motto, a reminder that the greatest acts of duty often happened not when following protocol, but when choosing compassion over convenience. As the morning sun warmed the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, James stood tall and proud, knowing that his stillness served a purpose far greater than ceremony. He was a guardian not just of traditions, but of the timeless truth that kindness, once begun, never really ends.